All right.
Sorry,
Now we're
I'd forgotten
recording.
to record.
So, well, I will just begin by perhaps more formally introducing Eliza in a still casual manner. Eliza Fernand is a video and installation artist, and she works primarily in space, sound, fabric, clay. I've known Eliza to work in kind of many mediums and just to take to all of them with a real passion and aesthetic sensibility that really runs through all of her work. Um, Recently has received an MFA in Interdisciplinary Arts from Sierra Nevada University, and has exhibited work internationally in solo and group exhibitions, and has received lots of grants and all of the things that a professional artist does. I believe Eliza is currently in Grand Rapids en route to Chicago, so thank you for joining us from there. And I've had the pleasure of knowing Eliza for many years, having met on an artist residency in North Carolina years ago, and we've kind of followed each other's practices and lives ever since. So it's really wonderful to bring your work to neutral ground here on Treaty 4 and to have hosted you for a little while. And I'm really excited to hear what you have to say tonight. So take it away.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you so much for having me and for inviting Sherry and I to be in this exhibition. So I'm going to share my screen. I have some pictures and some videos to show tonight. Yeah. Okay. So here's a self-portrait while zooming. I thought, can everyone see? Do a little thumbs up. Okay, cool. It's so funny because this like Zoom situation feels like a throwback for me at this point because this semester I'm just finishing my first semester of teaching back in person. And today I was hosting, or I invited a guest speaker to my class that's in person who lives in New York. So we were Zooming with her, and I was like, "Oh, I'm back in the Zoom world." I know some folks have been Zooming more than others. This is a picture of me when I'm sitting in class because I did do a low residency MFA. So already a lot of our meetings would happen over the internet. But then, of course, with the pandemic, we went through a couple of sessions that we would have had in person online. Um, and the background that I have in here is this little ghost that I got at a party several years ago. And it was like something I was sort of stealing. It was like a decoration, but I was like, can I take this? Can I have this? And my friend was like, don't take it because you're probably just gonna get rid of it. And I was like, no, I'm never gonna get rid of this. I love this thing. And it lights up and it changes colors. So I had made this backdrop for a series of interviews I was doing for my thesis project, and then I was just using it in class today. But I thought I could open with this image because just thinking about my experience in grad school and how much I got to like be a nerd and read things and talk about things and look at things. And now I'm a professor, so I get to do that at work, even though I'm usually the only one talking with my students who are freshman university students that aren't art majors. So, yeah, just kind of acknowledging like where we've been the last couple years. And in my own practice, I've been quite isolated, and a lot of the work that I've been doing comes from that space. And I've also been working primarily in video, kind of because it is like this flexible medium that can transport very, very quickly from one place to another, and take up space or not take up space. Because I for the most part, have worked as a sculptor, but I've always done some video and some animation and sound work along the way. But in working in my MFA, in part because it was sort of a transitory space that we would work in, I dove deeper and deeper into working in my computer. Um, so, also thinking about the title of this show, the title of this show is, well, the title of the exhibition is Watery Ghosts, that Amber titled. And then the title of the sort of main component of one of the two main components of my installation is a video piece. And that piece is called Non Propositions and Reasonings. So I had started working in this uh, circular format video that you see behind Sherry and Jera right now. And I started working that way to make videos for the planetarium. So when you make a video for the planetarium, you're making a circular format video, and the edges of the video are actually the horizon line when it's projected on the dome. Um, and so I was making a planetarium video for this series that happens here in Grand Rapids, where a local band will play in the planetarium and an artist makes visuals. And I started digging up a lot of footage that I had of water because I am always videotaping water. I've been very drawn to it. And like when I look at all these, like when I started, because I had 6 weeks to make this piece, so I was mining a lot of footage that I already had. I wasn't shooting a lot of new footage. Um, and even for the piece that I made for Neutral Ground, I went back and looked at some of my mini DV tapes from college in like the early 2000s, and I had like just me sitting there videotaping water. So it's always been something that's been something that really draws me in. Um, but I was using a lot of that footage for this concert series, and then I really wanted to make my thesis my thesis for my MFA. I wanted to make a planetarium show. Because of the pandemic, the show I had scheduled at the planetarium was canceled the week that it was gonna run. So I got to the point where I did like a dress rehearsal, and I was going into the planetarium and seeing my videos projected on the dome, and it was a really incredible experience. Um, so I sort of, at the word of 2020 was like pivot, right? So I pivoted, and I instead of doing a planetarium show, obviously because we couldn't access the space, I made a variety show for my thesis project, and it was a variety show that was aired on public access television. Um, and you're probably like staring at the slide, like, what is she talking about? But I'm getting there. So, the variety show, I think it's important that I mention that because I feel like that format is for me, like working as an interdisciplinary artist, someone who works in many different materials. In a way, video can encapsulate those materials because it captures them, it captures images of them. And then also, this variety show can capture like all of these different ideas. It kind of like makes a container for me to put all of these things in. And so the piece for Neutral Ground is sort of similar in the way the content is quite different than the variety show, but it's similar in the way that it's a collection of things and they're all kind of put next to each other. And when I started the variety show, I was thinking of this Monty Python. I don't know if it's a Monty Python film that's called Now for Something Completely Different, or if that's just a line they say, but I loved Monty Python films when I was a kid, And I like that idea of kind of like stacking one thing next to each other, which also relates to a really large body of my work, which is patchwork quilting. So, just kind of thinking about research, and I've always really loved wondering. I think my parents are on this call. They can probably remember me saying, like, well, what if this and what if that? And like always kind of like, I mean, part of it's like a anxiety issue, but part of it is also just like very playful, like wondering, like, what about this? What about that? And kind of like teasing out all these different ideas and putting them next to each other. And then with patchwork quilting, you're putting these fabrics next to each other, right? And then seeing what's happening. And that's been a big part of my practice. And then with video, it's you can do the same thing. You know, you're taking these incongruous things and you're arranging them. Um, so just thinking through that and the way that like this connecting line, and I think research for me is the same. It's a gathering and a piecing together. So why am I showing you this slide of a screenshot from like a university math website? I am showing you this because I had this conversation months back with Sherry and Amber as we were starting to talk about the show. And this idea came to me to arrange these videos in a Venn diagram because I very much still want to develop a planetarium show. And so I wanted to make this work for the work for the gallery is sort of like this visualization of the research for a potential other iteration of it that could be like a full dome projection. So as I was playing with that, I thought about this overlap. So this image is from, again, just kind of this like process of research where you look into something and you find something else and it leads you in a new direction. Um, and it's an example of a Venn diagram. So Venn diagram is, they can be used for, this one is like a math class, but it's connected to logic and the theory of logic. So obviously, you probably know what a Venn diagram is. It's two circles that are overlapping. You can have multiple, many circles, but you kind of start with two. And then this is showing us these two different ideas. So actually, I'm going to show you this. So this is a screenshot again from a paper from Princeton about logic. And it says that logic is often described as the study of reasoning. Um, and then they have this fun quote from Charles Peirce at the sort of onset of developing what is called modern logic. The object of reasoning is to find out, from the consideration of what we already know, something else we do not know. Consequently, reasoning is good if it be such as to give a true conclusion from true premises and not otherwise. And they give the example here of if you're looking for your keys, you look in your pocket, you look on your table, and then you look in your car, right? So, so this sort of idea of reasoning is almost like deductive reasoning, right? You're thinking of different things. What if it's here? What if it's here? What if it's here? Um, and then in the same paper, they talk about propositions. So propositions are the things that can be true or false. A non-proposition does not represent the world as being thus or so. They are not claims about how things are. Hence, non-propositions cannot be said to be true or false. It cannot be said that the world is or is not the way a non-proposition represents it to be, because non-propositions are not claims. So basically, a proposition is a claim of something that can be true, and non-propositions not. So I sort of glommed onto these words as the title to back up this concept of like this research and what happens, what is the point of research? How are these two bodies that I'm researching overlapping, and what conclusions are drawn, or do I not want to draw conclusions at all? So this is like basically a set of propositions. No fossil can be crossed in love. Some who may be crossed in love are oysters. And then in the middle, the conclusion is some oysters are not fossils. Um, and oh, sorry, that was like the second one. So that was an example of a categorical logic in Venn diagrams. So kind of like just trying to see what's true, and not really finding what's true or not true. Just like these finding these conclusions. And so uh, the body of work that I am drawing on is making these. Sorry, I'm going to switch to a video. So I'm making these this research about ghosts and water. So when I put those, like physically put them on top of each other, what happens? When I put them next to each other, what happens? And what kind of overlaps happen between the research? So I want to show a video of the gallery installation now that I got through all of that. Hopefully that made sense. Also, I invite you to ask questions or make comments. I'm like a teacher, so I'm used to being interrupted when I'm talking, so feel free. So this is, I know Neutral Ground is going to take some really great documentation. I just shot some video and some images before I left, so I'd be prepared for this talk.
As scarcity, a faint, shadowy trace, as in a ghost of a smile, or the least bit, as in not a ghost of a chance. When we say they move silently like a ghost, we describe the ghost as lack of sound. A ghost is an extreme lack. As a verb, ghosting means to ignore someone, to disappear on them. You have removed yourself from the relationship. The person you ghosted feels your void. There are many, many ghost writers with
Sorry, I muted myself. So that's a clip of the gallery space. So on one wall, we see these sculptures that I made on shelves, and then we scan over, we see Sherry's installation sculpture and Sherry's drawings, and then my installation with the video on the wall. And so when we were talking about this show very early on, the sound was really important because I was writing this epic, the video piece is 43 minutes long. So I was like writing this sort of epically long dual channel, dual like audio piece, and I knew that Sherry's work would have this running water in it. So I was really interested of this fountain component to Sherry's work and how it would interact with the video in space. So that's what the video looks like in person. But I have made a version of it that we can look at, where I took the two circular videos and put them side by side. And I can play a little clip of that so you can get a sense of the sound. So I'm just gonna like scrub through it because again, it's 43 minutes long, so we're not gonna watch the whole thing. But there are different categories of, maybe I'll play some of it while I'm talking. So I have like several categories of research, I guess, that are, or this like findings, these non-propositions and these reasonings um, that are included in a voiceover. So the imagery on the right is all the sort of like ghost associated imagery. The imagery on the left is all the water imagery. And then the same goes for the sound. So in the gallery, there are headphones, there's sound that's playing through speakers, so you can hear it in the space. There's also headphones and a bench so that you hear the two channel sound. So there's the sound that correlates with the right circle comes through the right ear and vice versa. Um, and then there's this sort of like water drone over the top of it. Uh, so a friend of mine, I sent this to a friend of mine, and he very generously wrote about my work because obviously this is experimental work. It's work in progress. Sherry and I were both given the opportunity to make something that we wouldn't have been able to make in a different space. And so we showed up and uh, we put the work together, and I'm still kind of digesting it. So I'm actually quite interested in any responses that you all have tonight, because it is this kind of, my intention is to not necessarily draw conclusions um, or make anything that feels very like final. Um, so my friend who watched this work, he wrote me back, and he really kind of sussed out these different categories that come up in the voiceover. Um, and he talked about like he said there's this personal autobiographical element where I'm telling stories about my life, and I refer to myself as I. There's also this research. So there are some points where I'm like presenting someone else's research. I talk about a hydrofeminist scholar and an abolitionist scholar, um, and actually like cite other people's quotes and like quote them. So it's this sort of like more formal research. I also directly address COVID and racial inequity. And so these are like these sort of large looming topical issues in our culture currently. So he noted it's kind of like has this timestamp. Um, which I'm definitely interested in. And I'm interested in that idea of like creating work that's always like has the mindset of the present, and especially with the pandemic and the stages that we're going through with that. Um, and then also, there's some parts that have what he referred to as formal instructions, and they're kind of relate to some earlier audio or like audio and video works that I've made where I am sort of emulating a guided meditation. Um, and one of them, it's like a recipe for a bath. I think I'll play that one. Um, and then there's also this like associative dialogue. So there's a segment where I question like, is a cast in slip casting, is that a ghost of the original? And I talk about this sort of scientific research around water, like the idea of these different types of molecules that are attracted or repelled by water. So it's this shifting, ongoing, looping piece that has all of these different things kind of next to each other, building on this dialectic where there's not, um, like, I hope that it's open for interpretation. Like, as I make these questions, maybe you're making these questions as well. Um, so I will play. I wanted to kind of like scrub through so you can see some of the imagery. The imagery is pretty sparse, and then some of them are like more highly edited um, as far as like animation layers. And I have some found footage. It's all footage that I shot except for this Casper footage. Um, and it's also again kind of like footage that I shot at different times in my life. Like this water on the left is a friend's pool in LA. This water is from a visit to the Great Salt Lake. It's like this foamy stuff that happens there. This is Lake Michigan at sunset. Um, this is a small lake by my house here. Um, and this is a view of outside of my parents' house when it's raining on the lake in front of their house. So kind of mining like all of this footage that I've just been collecting and I've been attracted to, and bringing those things together and letting them sort of stand sparsely with the voiceover. So I'll play the beginning of it. Again, it's like meant to be played on loop, so there's not necessarily a beginning or an end, but you can get the sense from this voiceover.
What is a ghost? Maybe a ghost is a spirit or a specter, a wandering soul that has left its earthly body and has found a new form, hiding beneath a white sheet. I think that ghosts live inside of us. I am haunted by several ghosts, past versions of me, things that I have done, things that have been done to me. For some people, ghosts can be a form of motivation. If they've done wrong, a ghost will haunt them, and this fear persuades them to do the right thing. Personally, I don't believe that ghosts pass moral judgment. I don't believe that anyone is judging us except ourselves. And ghosts are as ubiquitous as the air. There might be a ghost stuck beneath my fingernails right now. A ghost is tickling the hair in my nose as I breathe the ghosts in and out. You might already know this, but all of the water on the planet Earth has been here the whole time. There is no more or no less water than there ever was since this planet was born. It has and will continue to take many forms, constantly cycling through evaporation and precipitation, freezes and thaws, and all of the ways that humankind has trapped and employed water for consumption and industrial operations. The water that is inside of your body right now will come out soon. It will take the form of tears, piss, poop, sweat, menstrual blood, ejaculate, and spit. A little while after it comes out, it will turn back into clouds. It will meet up with the waterways, streams and creeks, and rivers and lakes and oceans. All of the water that you drink in the form of fizzies and coffee and the juices of fruits, it will end up in puddles that the birds take sips from. The water that a whale strained through her baleen plates on the day of your birth is now plasma moving through your spleen, and next year it will end up evaporating off of a cat's tongue while she is licking the fur on her back.
Okay, so um, that is the that's what I have in the gallery. And then the other thing I have um, is uh, this collection of ceramics. So let me get back to my slideshow. So uh, here's a shot of one of these ceramic busts that I've been making. And in this image, I'm in the middle of shooting an animation where I made a mold to make a ceramic bust. Then I used the mold to make a snow bust. And then I was making a stop motion animation where I allowed the snow to melt. And I was animating this interaction of these busts. So this is like a behind the scenes shot of one of these busts in action. So I've been making slipcast ceramics for um, quite a long time, but this is actually the first time I've shown them in a gallery. So a lot of the slipcast work that I've made has been functional. And then in the last handful of years, I've started making more sculptural work and playing with the repetition of these forms. So I have this bust that has shown up in several of my video works as this sort of like stand-in for the narrator or for the viewer or just like as a person, which again kind of like it's been part of this sort of like campy um, public access TV, handmade like DIY sense of the video work is like these busts kind of showing up and doing different things, having different personalities, being sort of stiffly animated. You saw one of the in the video we watched of the gallery space, you saw like the bust that was sort of like meant to be like swimming upstream and then pulling downstream. So I wanted to show these works, like these works have been more of a prop, and so I wanted to show the works in the video in the gallery, um, and kind of give them some space because um, they hadn't been shown this way before. And in my house, they kind of live on these little shelves and they come out as needed. And so wanted to show them kind of as they live in these arrangements on these shelves as a prop or as kind of a tchotchke. So I have a lot of like knickknacks and tchotchkes in my life, and um, my relationship to ceramics. Like ceramics is so many things, and of course we interact with it a lot of different ways. And so there's this um, sort of figurine that is very much like taps into playfulness and nostalgia. And then also thinking of like the bust and the sort of history of classical sculpture as like the bust being this sort of like foundational point of like representational art. Um, so I took pictures of each of the shelves in the gallery, and I figured I would just kind of go through. This was the arrangement on the wall, and this is a group. These three ghosts were the leftovers from a project I did where I made 50 of these slipcast ghosts. And I shot some footage of me slipcasting them um, to include in the video. And I'm thinking a lot about like because I'm also a ceramics instructor, so I don't often use ceramics at this point for like my work, but it's like a big part of my day to day because I'm teaching it all the time. And so we're always talking about water in my classroom and how important this level of dryness is to clay when you're working with it. And part of the voiceover in the video talks about this body of water that lives in the clay body in the classroom that's always like circulating through. And even yesterday, one of my students was just like, clay is always just like going between a liquid and a solid. And I was like, yeah. And the ghost actually, that line in the video, "What is a ghost?" is a assignment that I gave to my students a few years ago. I was like, "What is a ghost?" And then I and then I showed them this slideshow of things that they were like, "We don't know why you're showing us this because we were born 15 years ago, and you're showing us like Ghost Rider, which is a show from the 90s on PBS, and the movie Ghost, which they also don't have reference to. But I was just like, I kept saying to them, like, what is a ghost? What is a ghost? And we're sort of like sussing out these ideas of what it could mean. So that was really like kind of the starting point for me, was like giving my students this assignment. That was something I was actually interested in. And then I got this opportunity to make an art CSA where like 50 people buy shares of the CSA. And I was like, cool, I'm going to make 50 of these ghosts. And then I'm going to paint their faces in these sequences so that I can animate with them. So you saw them in the clip that I played. And then here are a couple of busts that were some, I was experimenting with using fabric to create their facial expressions. And then those fabric pieces are stuck on with tape, like a double-sided tape, so I could animate with it. So I could change out their features. And I have one like animation where like the frown like turns upside down and makes a smiley face. Um, and the piece in the middle of these two busts is a slip cast glass prism that I have. And this version of it is it has a metallic glaze, and then it has a rainbow like drippy glaze on each side. So that's a rainbow prism. This one is a prism with a kind of corroded edge to it. You can't see it that well here, but it has a glaze on it that's like a Pompeian ash. It's like a volcanic sort of like partially destructed prism. And next to it is these slip cast witch fingers that are the witch fingers, the plastic witch fingers you wear on Halloween. And I've made several of these castings from them. Here's a grouping of them. You can see it better. So I made, I think I didn't include the pictures of the tools for self-touch. Oops. Well, there are several sort of tools that are made with these fingers. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, I always had this idea of like these tools for self-touch being these false fingers. But they kind of like, they're like a weirdly sexual, like sex toy reference slash like tchotchke. And they're made to, some of them are like made with a cast of a cut crystal. So they're like these precious objects. But this one is like teeth that I wear, or it's fingers that I wear as teeth. So you can see in the darker part of the clay there, that's the impression of my own teeth. And so I can actually wear this piece in my mouth. And then the shelf that was up high had like another sort of volcanic, like crusty prism, and a witch finger on the top of a prism. This pairing is an impaled witch finger. So I made this like series of these impaled witch fingers on the prism shape, and I don't really know why, honestly. I also was like reading a lot about like witch trials. Um, so there's sort of like there's definitely like some violence in them, but I still feel like they're kind of toys or like playful objects. This bust has a long tongue coming out of it and a blue glaze, and so kind of playing with this like layering of expression. So the glaze that looks kind of like white is a clear glaze over a blue glaze that's an underglaze. So yeah, I feel like with ceramics, like I'm thinking the way that they connect to the video work for me is like this interplay of liquid and solid and like this shifting of form that happens in water, that happens with ghosts. um, and then like thinking through the slip casting process as like this void, creating the void. And in that clip I played, I talked about ghosts being a lack or a void. And this one, it is like a sort of this bust. I put a glaze on that like drips over the face. There's a part of the voiceover in the video work that talks about it's a meditation for turning into a ghost, and it's like you're sort of visualizing everything inside of your body melting and then turning into a puddle and then floating up into the air as a cloud, and now you're a ghost, so you don't have to like pay taxes or anything. um, so I made that bust after I was writing this piece. So there's some overlap between these, and then there's some that it's just like, I don't know, this is like some weird sculpture Eliza made. Um, and just letting that be sort of open to what the viewer takes from it. And then this like sort of sad, crying, like frowny bust. Um, is at the beginning of the show, and it's like greeting you, but it's also looking away from you when you come in because it's kind of like uh hiding its tear, and it has like frowny nose and frowny eyeballs and frowny teeth. Um so yeah, I think that like the subject matter I'm working with is it can be like quite dark, but also I'm trying to make um just space for it to be normal or to be weird or to be kind of playful and funny, and to make it be like it's okay. This is a shot. I was actually taking some shots in the gallery, and the way my camera was capturing the video projection on the wall, it was making like strange colors. And I actually took a bunch of pictures of it. And so I think it's sort of indicative of this process of just always kind of letting the work show me what the next step is. And so I'm interested in what the next step might be for this work, whether it's going to, like, footage from this maybe condenses into a single channel full dome projection. My fantasy for a planetarium show is something where I have video on the dome, and then there's pre-recorded sound and voice, and then also I'm there. Like, I don't know if you all have been to a planetarium, but you can go and there will be like a person sort of guiding you through the experience. Like they might have a laser pointer and they're like pointing at different stars and stuff. And so, um, yeah, I have this idea of potentially like this is sort of this research stage that moves to something else. And I was saying maybe the next step is to draw some conclusions, but I'm not so sure about that because I am just really interested in the work being um, like, obviously my role as an educator is like making this like sort of educational experience, but I also hope that it's like non-didactic, that it's not telling you what to think. It's like proposing a lot of different potentialities or making you kind of ask your own questions. And that is my art talk. I know Amber and I were gonna do kind of a conversation style Q&A. Definitely interested to hear questions from the rest of the people here. And then I also brought a 12-minute experimental short film that is some work that I adapted from the variety show. If we wanted to do a little screening and Q&A of that, because I thought it might be fun. I'm change my glasses now. I thought it might be fun to do a like talk about the work in the show and then also kind of show some work that's not in the show. But I'm open to where the evening goes.
Thanks, Eliza. That was great. I don't need to like dominate the questions, so just wanted to leave some space if anyone has any comments. I see that Noreen might have left, but said in the chat that she really enjoys the diversity of your approaches to your practice, and it's very interesting work. Thank you, Noreen.
Noreen.
I have like a few questions. Wait, Margaret, you go first. Margaret wants to know about hydrofeminism. Or wants to speak about hydrofeminism. Sorry, I misread that comment. Yeah, I would double that. Yeah.
Sure. So hydrofeminism is a term that I was introduced to through the work of Estrida Niamanis. I think that she coined the phrase. And I actually found her work through looking at Ania Lockwood. Ania Lockwood is a really interesting sound artist who has been working since, I feel like she probably was in college in like the 50s, and she was making things like smashing all this glass. And like she's famous for lighting pianos on fire, and then people just watch it, or they're also making a recording of it. So I found this documentary of her recently where she was very adorably like dropping a microphone into a river and then just listening. And she's made all these albums that are about different bodies of water. So in the site that was hosting this documentary, they had some writing and they talked about this idea of hydrofeminism. So I was like, what is that? I gotta like get in there. So hydrofeminism is this way of thinking about watery bodies, and the general concept of feminism is that we're all connected, right? And we're all equal, and we all like this intersectional idea of like understanding this interconnectedness. And so if you think of yourself and everyone else as watery bodies, like if you sort of understand yourself as water, then you understand more the way that you are integrated in the world, and how basically how we're all connected. Like if you think of the cycles of water, you think of our bodies as water, and also our minds in a way. So it's a few different things. Like I've read some of Nehemiah's work, and I cite it in this video, and she talks about this idea of like this watery body consciousness that will sort of open up this idea of like how we're all interconnected. She also introduced me to the watery ape evolutionary theory, which is really interesting and fun to think about. And then also kind of talking about, she also talks about, she says like when you drink a glass of water, you're ingesting the ghosts that are in the water. And she talks about how water remembers. And so there's this like Jungian concept of collective unconscious. And it's sort of like how we all know the same things. And like if you think of the evolution of humans and technology and thought, people are discovering things in different places of the world at the same time. Um, she doesn't talk about that, but I connected to it because she talks about how water remembers basically what we've done to it. And when we were continually like ingesting it and cycling it through, and it's also cycling through all these like fracking and like washing of pesticides and like all these ways that we use water in our like industrial chores. Um, and all the ways that we've sort of like infected the water with like plastics and so on. So there's like this collective understanding through imagining yourself as water, and then there's also this collective understanding that water brings to us because we're swallowing those ghosts. We're sort of understanding our impact as water is like holding this trauma. I think that's how I can explain hydrofeminism. There's some pretty good YouTube videos if you want to Google it.
Is it my turn?
Yeah.
That was so fun. Thank you so much, Eliza, and for everyone that made this happen. As someone that's gotten to work with you, it's really exciting to see all these amazing places that your work is going now. And I just feel really inspired. So thanks for that. Something that was really cool for me is, I guess, the ways I've experienced your work has been like very tactile and very like object body oriented, and I hadn't gotten to hear your writing really before. And so like those clips of you speaking over the video, I just found them to be like so powerful, even though we only got this little snippet of it. And I guess I'm curious about how writing or reflecting and like adding words to these pieces, like, is there another step for that? In the same way you're like gathering thoughts and gathering materials, but is there another dimension that you want to take any of your written work in?
Yeah, I think I started to really let my writing come forward with the work I was doing for the variety show. So the piece that I wanted to screen tonight has this like voiceover for the duration of it, and so um, some of them have some of the work for that has more or less voiceover, but I've always really enjoyed writing, and I think when I went to grad school, I was like, one thing I want to do is get better at writing and like maybe publish my writing somewhere. And there's this idea of like publishing your writing, like um, what is that? Like, you know, there's a lot of ways to do it, and so what I sort of came to was that my writing can show up in this time-based work that is the video, and it has like the video has that tactile experience. I think one of my classmates was like, "You're always working in video and it's flat. It's like 2D." And I was like, "No, it's it's not, because it's like a window." Um, but yeah, I think that I started using that device of the voiceover so that I could share my writing. Sometimes it's really, for me, like cringy to hear my voice. So I'm um, still working through that, but I made an audio piece that was just my voice, and it's a hotline that you can call. Um, and kind of playing a lot with like how I can affect my voice. Like this piece, the Watery Ghost piece is pretty much just me talking. And when I hear it, I'm like, oh, I want to go back and re-record some of these bits. But a lot of the other things I've done, I was sort of experimenting with subtle ways that I can affect my voice. Um, and I'm curious about how that affects the writing, because this piece actually I shared the script for it with Amber, and so she had read it before she had actually seen or heard the video. And I thought about how there's like this potential um, disconnect or like perversion of the writing when you're reading it, because the way you read it affects it so much, and the person's voice affects it, and like the gender of the voice and all of that. Um, and it was funny because with some of my other work, like I'm doing a voiceover, and then people just think it's me, and I'm like, no, no, this is like when you're writing, like you can write from many different perspectives. You can write in first person, and it's not necessarily autobiographical, right? So that's just been something kind of interesting and working with that device of the voiceover. Um, and I think that it makes sense for me for my writing to show up in the video work. But I also, for the hotline piece where you can call and listen to different audio that are kind of like guided, they're not guided meditations, they're like guided experiences. That I made a printed version of that. So I made like a zine um, that has that written out, and I also asked people to like read it out loud to each other because it's like instructions. So I tried to make, and that happens a lot with my work where I have different versions of it. Like I had this quilted piece that was a quilt, but there was also like a video. So if you don't have room for the quilt, maybe you have room for the video, or um, like there's often multiple versions of the same thing. So that piece existed in print and as a sound piece on my website and as this sort of anonymous hotline. And then also as the posters that I put up to attract people to the hotline. So yeah, there's usually like these sort of unfolding phases that the work shows up in. So with this piece, like Amber had said, do you think you want to have a like a artist book or something? And I definitely do. Like I am interested in how the text changes if somebody's reading it on their own time and in their own voice, rather than they hear me reading it at the pace and the tone at which I read.
Yeah, I might just like add to that, because you mentioned when you shared the writing, you did share the writing with me before it came together with the video. And I think it changed and had a few more like edits or iterations before it got recorded. But yeah, for me, it was, I guess there was less, I think the way that you presented the text when you're reading it is very like, because I know you, and so there wasn't like a shock to hear the voice, but it was very like, you clearly had read it in a certain way that wasn't necessarily conveying emotion, even if it was like very personal subject matters. So yeah, in that sense, I could tell there was like a lot of consideration to the way it was read, but I was curious about like how the text got connected with the imagery, because it really, that to me seems like this is where it's like a visual poem with these images, and having like existed in the gallery with it, sort of seeing it and like half listening to it. And then the other day I just had the like pleasure of being able to sit down for 45 minutes and listen through the whole thing. And I was like, oh, wow, like I've been wanting to do this since we installed it. But yeah, like it was a very different experience to like have it all wash in, which I know isn't necessarily your intention that someone comes in and watches it for 45 minutes. But having these sort of like glimpses of, yeah, like a visual poetry or visual, like this collage of, and I don't know, I'm using the word poetry. It's not necessarily poetic, or like, I think it is poetic, but maybe you didn't approach it as a poem. But yeah, with the text and images together, it's like this whole other world. So I don't know if there's a question in that, but if you wanted to
Mhm.
share some thoughts.
I mean, I do think of poetry. Like when I made the zine for the hotline audio, I was like playing with the way that the words were on the paper. Like it was sort of laid out like a chapbook. Um, and I think in poetry, yeah, there's this visual quality to the way that the words are arranged on the page. You could take a different text and then that's like, from a, I don't know, textbook, and then rearrange the words on the page and call it a poem, maybe. um, but yeah, I think with this piece, like I was kind of getting into this idea of like for the hotline, I have this affected voice because I'm like being like a sex hotline person, um, and being very like suggestive in the language. Uh, and then for some of the other videos, there's this sort of like, I don't know, it's kind of like a sleepy voice. And then, or like deadpan voice. And then I tried to do more of like an alert voice for one piece. But I think it made the most sense for me to be just kind of speaking in my own voice for this work because it is so much. There is a lot of autobiographical content, and it is very much like coming from me. Um, but yeah, I'm interested in that sort of like the authority of like the written word or like the uh, like posterity of having published work. And so this is like a way that I'm just publishing my own work because the platform I have is that I get to show work in a gallery. So this is like a way that I can show my writing in the gallery. And I've also worked in like some other like versions of text-based work because I've made some quilts that have words on them. So I hadn't really thought about that before, but like the text has gotten longer and longer, and, like more and more prevalent.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering like how tied to the words are the images that you've chosen
Oh
to.
yeah, that was your question.
I know I got very like
How the images and the words come together.
like if you
Um,
were to publish it as like a written text, would it be important to have that imagery with it, or would it exist on its own without the imagery?
with this piece, it's hard to say, I think, because um, yeah, the imagery does a lot. I think what the imagery does is it like holds the space. It holds your attention and like puts you in a space in which you are listening to the audio. Because the imagery is sort of minimal or like meditative. Um, and Sherry F had described it as hypnotic um, when we were setting up. So, and I think that is that like looking through the footage I have and being like, I sat here and recorded like 25 minutes of just like Niagara Falls or whatever. So, but just thinking about the way that I paired those things, I wanted some of it to be sort of like incongruent and some of it to be feel like it was paired up. So I didn't want it to be like one for one, like talking about this, here's an image of this. But there are some points where that happens, and then there's some points where it's not happening. And so that's something really fun too of playing with the two videos, the Venn diagram, of thinking about what's going on one side. And with the audio, it's like saying like now you're listening to this side and now you're listening to this side, but you're actually seeing both things at once. So you're not going to ignore one. So they're always informing each other too, um, which I'm interested in playing with that more. Is like having more videos that are separate, but they're playing simultaneously, and how to do that in space. Uh,
I
but
think
yeah,
that's
I think it's just a lot of it's intuitive.
that makes sense. I was um, sorry to interrupt there. I was just thinking about how, as a like behind the scenes moment, getting the sound to work properly, right and left through headphones and speakers was so challenging. And I think Eliza and I ended up being in the gallery till like 11:30 one night. We were like, oh, we'll just quickly test it out. And I'm really, really so glad that we got it. Like we
Oh,
did
it's
get
like
it.
we'll do it right before the opening.
We're like, we'll just do a quick tech check. It's like after dinner. And then it was like, this is maddening, but it was really important. And I think like being in the space and being able to hear the pan is really important when you have it on the headphones and it's like on the speakers in sort of a little bit of a muted way so that it's not kind of bombarding people when they come in, and also so staff isn't like, yeah, just sort of like a subtle wash, and then the headphones really transport you deeper into that world. And the pan really is important. Anyway, this is like so behind the scenes, but you don't see that stuff. It seems so simple, but it was like such a technological pain in the butt, that I'm really glad we got. But I see
Yeah,
that Sarah also has a question, so
great.
Oh, the audio is so lovely, and I actually didn't fully understand the complexities of like. I'm excited to re-listen and understand like the like matching of the left and the right and the meaning. And you may have touched on this, but I just was so interested in this footage being compiled from many different times in your life, and just like this archive that you've went back into and like used the word like mind visuals from. And I was wondering at what point like did you write the dialogue or the text? Like was it after making the visuals, or was that also bits and pieces compiled in a similar sort of collage way?
Yeah, so the text came before the visuals. The script I've been working on for uh, maybe like 5 months, like kind of picking it up and putting it down and having like an idea dump, um, or like getting high and writing down a bunch of things while I'm at the beach. So yeah, it's like been this thing where I knew that I wanted to do this. I had some different ideas, and then I kind of pick it up, or once I'm looking into one thing, I find something else. Um, but yeah, the process I took was, I don't remember, Amber, when it was that we talked. Like we had that meeting, you, me, and Sherry, like months back, and that would like in that meeting was when I sort of had the Venn diagram idea, um, and I had kind of known I'm attracted to these two veins of research, or these two different things that I'm being pulled towards, um, but. Uh, I don't know. I just, yeah, I think the idea was kind of born, and then I gathered all of these different things. And I tend to, like, I have around me, I have like all these things printed out, and then I'll print out like I'll be like, oh, what's this? And then I'll print out the whole article, and then I don't actually read the whole thing. Like, I'll read part of it and be like, and then and then I carry them around with me. This is Pauline Oliveros. Um, I carry them around with me like as if they're just gonna, like as if I'm gonna read them, or as if just having them is gonna, you know, through osmosis get into me. So yeah, at any time I'll have like uh, 3 or 4 like printed out essays and things. Bluettes, I should mention. Um, I think I was already like really interested in writing in this type of form when I found Bluettes. but Bluettes is this is my friend gave me a PDF, so I just printed out the whole entire book. Um, it's by Maggie Nelson, and it's all about the color blue. And Amber and I were talking about this, her influence, because she writes in this sort of reverie of like personal story. There's like a thread that sort of drops and then comes back in, and she has all this different research. So it's very influenced by her work. Or like, you know, there's kind of this coming together when I found her work. I was like, this is the way that I want to be writing. And I can't remember what the term that Amber used.
Auto theory, which makes it sound very like dry and academic, but you know what's out there.
So yeah, I think when I was in when I got to Canada, we were talking about Bluettes, and then this other book called The Crying Book. I think it's called The Crying Book. I had recommended it to Sherry because of her crying chamber, and then I'll just let this person in. and and I was talking about how like I didn't really like that book because of, I think because I didn't relate to the narrator that well. And I did really like Bluettes because I related to the narrator in that book more, maybe. So that's something I'm thinking a lot about with my writing, is like, how do I bring people in, or how do I, what are the choices I make, like when am I sort of like narrowing my reach, or like isolating or excluding someone through speaking from my experience.
I think we're sharing our like subtle dislike of the crying book. I don't know.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Mary didn't like it
Thank you,
either.
Mary.
I wanted to like it and was like, why don't I like it? Because it has like a lot of the things that I've liked in other writing. But yeah, there was something just kind of annoying. I don't know if I was just like, pull yourself together, woman. You're crying all the time. Like, I don't know. But
For me, it was like at the beginning, she talked about being ugly when she's crying. And I was like, excuse me? No, we're not like judging how we look when we cry. Or I'm not. I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. And I think I want my work to be representative of a queer experience. And I think I didn't like her work because it didn't feel queer to me. And Bluettes feels queer. So I think that was like kind of the turnoff, was just like some of the things she said. And I would read it and then like stop reading it and then read it again and kind of like it that time, and then like read it again another time and be like, I hate this book, but I'm gonna keep reading it again probably.
I read all mainly, well, not, I was invested in it. I didn't like, I got through it, but also because it had come up in the context of this show, I was like, this is important research. But also like, I think there's a way to look at a topic, and this feels relevant to your work again, like in that book, for those that haven't read it, it's like it's like going into depth about a lot of different instances of crying historically, and there's a lot of like historical research, some of which is quite interesting, and personal anecdotes interwoven, but it seems so like in the lane of like crying. And I think like where your work and also like Bluettes and Maggie Nelson's work diverts from that, it's like you could start with the topic of water or blue, but it doesn't have to stay in that like narrow lane. And also, and maybe that is coming from that queer perspective as well, of knowing that it doesn't always have to be so literally like coming back to this, like pounding home this one thesis statement or something.
Yeah, I was yeah, totally. I think I'm also really interested in like phenomenology and queer phenomenology. So like phenomenology is just like the way we experience things. Like I'm sitting at a table and I'm facing a computer and I see a keyboard. Um but like the idea of queer phenomenology is almost like a looking behind. And I was trying to connect that in my writing, in one of the passages where I talk about like looking at the waves and then looking at the dunes and sort of like taking the pounding of the waves from behind and like thinking of this like if you could apply this like queer phenomenology to being at the beach. Then you look behind, you see the dunes and you see the way they reflect the waves. um, and I didn't like I wrote about it, but I sort of took out the part where I was like inserting the word queer phenomenology because I felt like it was a little too like I mean I could develop it, but yeah, I think that this I think you're right that that maybe that book is a narrow focus, like where it's just like this thing, this thing, this thing, and it's not taking us out of the lane or like allowing us to wonder. It's like more restatement of facts and statement of like specific experiences. So when I write about my experiences, sometimes I'm um, obviously I'm writing about my experience, but I also like am hoping that people can sometimes put themselves in my shoes when they hear it, or like it is like, oh, I'm not necessarily telling like a straight truth from my life. I'm like saying something that may or may not be remembered in a certain way, and then maybe you find some like space in that you inhabit as well.
Yeah, and I wonder if we could go back to just like when you mentioned that you took out mention of queer phenomenology from the dune grass bit, because I know that was, first of all, that was a part of your text that resonated with me.
I remember
Whatever
like
reason, like it just was like a really, I think the line is like, the dune grass is taking the pounding of the wind so gracefully, and it felt like a very simple metaphor for like, you know, moving through the world and in the bodies that we inhabit, and from your like personal reflections on it. But yeah, if you don't want to go here, it's fine. But why did you kind of pull back there? And like I noticed that you don't necessarily forefront the experience of being like a queer person in the world, although I feel like that is sort of like implied. But again, I'm not sure if it's not at the forefront, and wondering if you wanted to like elaborate on that a little bit.
I guess I'm curious as to like how my work can be read as queer without talking about my gender or my sexuality. And so I'm really still feeling that out, and um, yeah, I think only like within the last few years have I talked about my work like expressing like being queer or like about queer expression, and so I'm still sort of like I think that some of the writing for the voiceover didn't feel like really finished for me, even though it was like I need to make this video and go to Canada now. um, but like I think there's room for me to continue um, writing and rewriting that, and so there might be another version where I feel like I can articulate the thing I'm trying to say. Um, and I think I just felt like this isn't developed enough to keep this. And even though it was like a very small mention, um, I think I liked having the mention in there to include that perspective and name it. But I took it out because I didn't want it to be I don't know. I wanted to know better, like that I know what I'm talking about before I write about it, which is hilarious because in this piece I'm like just repeating several things that I'm like, what about this thing and what about this thing? But I think there's some uh, yeah, there's some like fear for me in presenting my writing as fact or like as finished work, or presenting someone else's writing and misrepresenting it. I have like a fair amount of anxiety about um, doing something wrong. And it was helpful when I talked to Amber before the show, and she was like, we are an artist run center that supports experimental work. Because I think that this was like, I have been working on this for months, and I felt like it was the first thing that I finished and have shown like since I finished my thesis last May. So I was kind of putting a lot of pressure on myself. Like I was like, this is my next big thing, and I was like, and I was, and it does feel like it is a big thing that I worked on, but it's also, you know, part of this ongoing stream of things, and it's a stage of development. It's a new body of work that doesn't have all the pieces yet. You know, like with the hotline, it was like, what if I make these guided meditations, and then how do I present it? Oh, I can put it on a hotline and people call that, and then also I can make a zine. So it's like this unfolding, and with this project, this is kind of the first step.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments? I know we're getting close to the end of our time, so I wanted to open it up.
Can I speak? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I just want to say thank you because like I was very, I went into the gallery this afternoon. I wasn't there for very long, and I'm really happy that you that you gave me insights into how to look at it, and I'm surprised at how sort of the kind of intense research and the multiple researches that you do. Like I'm really impressed, so I have to go back and have another look. So I just wanted to say thank you, and I found your talk very interesting and the discussion very interesting. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm glad that you came in and that you came to the talk. And I feel like I'm hearing from both you and Jared, like something that I'm understanding is like that I designed this thing where I'm like, okay, there's a video here and there's audio in this here, and like thinking that what I've designed is very obvious. And then it's so great to hear like the actual experience of someone who saw the work, who wandered in at some point to see the work. Like I'm really interested in, that's the thing about putting this work up, is like what's going to happen when I show it. Like that's what I'm really interested in, is getting that response and that feedback.
Well, it made me very curious when I walked in, and I'm thinking, what is this? And I thought that I know I have a better understanding of what it is. So thank you again.
You have to come to Sherry's talk too.
Oh, okay, will do.
Yeah, it is next
Wednesday.
Wednesday. The
Yes.
15th.
Wednesday, December 15th, also at 6 p.m., also on Zoom. And the show will be up until January 15th. So for those who haven't seen it, they can come see it. And for those that have, can come back again and again and spend some time with it. Anyway, that's not to say that we need to stop chatting. Was there any? That seemed like a wrap up. Sorry.
Yeah, I know it's getting like kind of like to the time that we were thinking of ending, so we could wrap it up. Or if y'all are interested in watching this this other work that is, I feel like it's in the vein. It does like more prominently address like this queer identity and this like ideas of intimacy and how that's expressed. It also has the voiceover, and it also is like, it's like me, but it's a character. So if you want to, we can watch that and have a little reaction and close, or if you want to log off, we can end here.
Well, I would be interested, but perhaps we can stop the recording so that we don't screen your other work publicly. And just as one final note, to thank our key funders for allowing us to do everything we do. A big thank you to the Canada Council for the Arts, and for the City of Regina, and for the Sask Arts Board. And with that, I'll end the recording. Thank you so much to everyone who came and anyone who views this later.
Thanks.